What will the New York Mets lineup look like in 2026? We will try to answer that question here on the latest edition of the Believe in Mets pod. What's up, Mets fans? Chris Schubert, Jack McKessie back with you here once again to talk all things New York Mets. It's been a lot of pitching over the last two episodes with Freddie Peralta and then trying to figure out what this rotation was going to look like in the last episode. And Carlos Mendoza kind of gave away some of the plans of what the top of the lineup might look like for 2026. So we thought we would give it a crack here just a couple of weeks before spring training pitchers and catchers report. Jack, how are you, my friend?
Chris, I'm excited. It's like we're almost to Christmas, it feels like, when pitchers and catchers report, when spring training's about to start, the excitement of the 2026 season is starting to feel more real to me. And I'm over here on my second monitor looking at the FanGraphs projection of what the lineup's going to look like. And I was just telling you in the pre-show that I'm really excited about how much deeper I think this lineup is going to be than last year's, even with the departures of Brandon Nimmo and Pete Alonso as, two members of that core. There's a lot to discuss with how this might shake out, how things might literally line up when we get to 2026.
You know, it's a good episode when we almost do the episode in the pre-show before we push the record button, and we were teetering a little bit of spoiling some of the show content in the pre-show with the record button not pressed. So we decided to just hit the button and get right into it. And I do think this conversation is one of the subplots of this entire offseason for the New York Mets, because they changed a lot, right? There's a lot of new faces that are going to be in this lineup. Bo Bichette, Luis Robert, Marcus Simeon, Polanco. There's Carson Bench potentially. There's a lot of new, and we expected that, right? We weren't going to run this back. And so one of the byproducts of all of this change is this is going to be a really interesting test for Carlos Mendoza, for David Stearns, for the Mets coaching staff, the Mets analytics department, because now they have to figure out the best way to deploy all these new players and put out a product that they feel can win a lot of games. So it's a really interesting team building, lineup construction type episode, and I'm very much looking forward to see how Carlos Mendoza and company, because it's not just going to be him, just like it's not going to be the front office, very collaborative process to figure out what this lineup looks like. We can start with the very easy part of this. Francisco Lindor is going to hit in the one spot, and Juan Soto is going to hit in the two spot. But I do want to press pause, because this may be an unpopular opinion, because everybody loves Francisco Lindor hitting in that one spot. The Mets would be a lot better if they had a true traditional leadoff guy in front of Lindor and Soto, so that those guys could hit two or three. Like, who would be perfect for this team? They're not going to do it. But who would be perfect to hit in the one spot for this team?
I'm thinking you're going to say Luis Arias.
Luis Arias would just be perfect for this lineup. Like, the dude that hits singles, draws walks, gets on base. Like, you don't ask him to hit 5, 10, 15 home runs. You don't ask him to drive in runs. Literally, you're there to have a 380-plus on-base percentage and to just be on the base pads for when Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto do things. Now, again, I'm not going to complain about Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto hitting 1-2, but I just think it would be so much stronger if they had a Luis Arias type. Because remember, when Francisco Lindor got here, Brandon Nimmo was the leadoff batter because that's what they wanted in front of Lindor. He had a slow start. The Mets had a slow start that season, and then they flipped. But ideally, they would have a leadoff guy in front of Lindor, I think.
Yeah, I think the flip side of that argument is you can make the case that Lindor and Soto, I mean, Lindor definitely, Soto as of last year, have the ability to run the bases a little bit better than Luis Arias, who's not a base stealer. He would kind of be there with the intention of Lindor and Soto pushing him forward rather than him stealing the base. Obviously, Soto last year had the 30 stolen bases. I think Lindor had 28 or 29. Like, he was just short of another 30-30, I believe, last year. And
no, he had 31.
He did. Okay.
Yeah, 31 homers, 31 stolen bases. Soto had 38 stolen bases. And then they added Luis Robert to the lineup, who had 33. So they've got three guys who last year stole 30 bases, by the way.
Yeah, I think that's just like the only thing is like both of those guys can now steal bases. We know Juan Soto can suddenly, which hopefully will continue into a second season.
I just looked. They projected him. Fangraphs has projected him for 23 steals for this year.
I'll take that.
Imagine when signing Juan Soto that you expected him to ever get a 20-plus stolen base projection and to feel like that's a little light.
Right.
It's on the lighter side.
But that's like the, I guess, consolation for the feeling the sentiment that we both have that Luis Arias or, any other more traditional leadoff hitter is probably not going to be there, is the Mets have two guys at the top of the lineup that have the capability to get to second base and kind of be that setup for your 3, 4, 5 hitters, once they're already on and are ready to score.
Yeah, and again, Lindor's been so great in the leadoff spot that, you don't upset the apple cart, right? It feels like ideally if you could, wave a magic wand, you would have somebody in front of Lindor and have Lindor Soto be your 2-3, right? That would just lengthen the lineup a little bit. And you would want somebody like, you would want the contact and get on base ability of Luis Arias with the speed of Luis Angel Acuna. Like, that's the player that the Mets would like to have in that top spot.
Can I throw a total curveball here on that note that we did not talk about at all, really, in any podcast or let alone before this episode? But I was doing some reading on Kylie McDaniel's top 100 prospects that he just came out with for ESPN. Mets have 4 guys on there, not only in the top 100, but in the top 31, if you include Jonah Tong, is right at 31.
Well, it's a little bit of cheating because Nolan McLean is still on all of these lists, and he's not like I guess I understand he's technically a prospect, but we all know he's not actually a prospect. So the Mets are kind of cheating a little bit, but you know what? We'll take it.
Yeah, but the guy that really popped to me that is kind of fitting this mold that you're saying is AJ Ewing, who
he could be the guy.
Has not really shown a lot of pop in the minor leagues. I think he only hit 3 home runs last year, but he had 315 average from low A to double A and stole 70 bases at an 86% clip. So, like, you think a bit longer term, maybe not 2026 necessarily, or at least certainly not the beginning of the season. But you can kind of see where AJ Ewing could come up and make an impact as maybe that new leadoff hitter that Brandon Nimmo was earlier in his career before he kind of flipped to more of a power guy hitting towards the middle of the lineup. So I think that might be the long-term vision for the Mets.
That'd be
but
great.
I think 2026 right now, like, it's going to be Lindor. It's probably going to be Soto at the top 2 spots.
So we're in agreement. Lindor, Soto, 1 and 2 going into this season. And then I think it's kind of a choose-your-own-adventure here through the rest of this lineup. The Fangraphs projection has the middle of the order being Bo Bichette, Jorge Polanco, and Marcus Semien. I'm not sold on this being what they do. I know Carlos Mendoza kind of trial ballooned, kind of threw it out there like, hey, Lindor, Soto, Bichette would be pretty good. And I understand why you would think that. The conventional wisdom is you get your best players towards the top of the lineup so that they get more at-bats over the course of a 162-game season, because that you want those guys hitting more, getting more plate appearances, getting more at-bats, getting more opportunities. I just don't know if that's putting Bo Bichette in the best place to succeed, nor do I think it's putting Jorge Polanco in the best position to succeed, to hit 4th. I'm just going to give you the numbers for both of these guys. Has played 331 games batting 2nd. Well, we know that's off limits because Lindor Soto is going to be the top of the order, right? So then you go into the next 2 places where he's played a significant amount of games. 62 games, so a full season's worth hitting leadoff. But we know that's not going to happen. And then the next spot with 146 games, he's batting 4th. Everything after that, 70 games batting 3rd, 25 games batting 5th, barely hits in the bottom 4th of the lineup. So when looking at this, if you just want to base it off of how many games he's hit in a certain spot in the lineup, 4th is the one that you have available to you. Now, in those 146 games he's hit 4th, he's hit 312 with 18 homers, 99 RBIs, drew 38 walks. So some pretty good numbers. It's actually better numbers than in any other spot of the lineup, including batting 2nd. And then you look at Jorge Polanco. He's hit the most games. Sorry, I lost it here. In the 2nd spot, 332. The next spot that he's hit in the most games is 3rd, where he's hit 211. So I wonder, and now he's only hit 245 batting 3rd. He's hit 196 batting 4th. Now, this is not the be-all, end-all. The protection, who you have around you in a lineup can factor into what type of pitches you see and how this all plays out. But looking at just the historics of these guys' careers, it might actually make more sense to go Lindor, Soto, Polanco, and then have Bichette act as a second leadoff guy. If you go 1, 2, 3 in the first inning, you then start the second inning with Bo Bichette, who's a more, I would say, traditional leadoff type hitter than a Jorge Polanco.
Yeah. I mean, I see it. I think I'm trying to think about the strategic counter argument being in that situation, you're getting lefty to start against a right-handed pitcher. But because Lindor and Polanco are switch hitters, teams can't really take advantage of that
Right.
because they would just flip to the other side. Because that was what I thought you were going to say when you said that there's going to be a bit of a curveball with what Carlos Mendoza has said. It's probably going to be Lindor, Soto, Bichette at the top, probably Polanco fourth. But you said you disagreed. My reservation was going to be the lefty, lefty, lefty thing, but obviously because of the versatility and the switch hitting of Lindor and Polanco, that gives you more flexibility to not let other teams exploit that weakness. I almost thought you were going to say, I wonder if Lindor is in the leadoff and they actually bump Soto down to 3, put Bichette up to 2 because he has so much experience in that second spot, and you're still guaranteeing that Juan Soto hits in the first inning, and then Polanco 4.
I do wonder how much it's going to factor in that the last 2 seasons, with Pete hitting behind him and then Judge hitting behind him the year prior, the guys that have hit behind Soto have really thrived because the teams are avoiding Soto and pitching to those guys. That I wonder if you want to put Bichette behind Soto so that, like, an opposing pitcher, when they open up the game and they're facing Lindor, Soto, Bichette, there's nowhere to go. I mean, there's nowhere for you. You're not maneuvering. And, like, I don't want to do this all season. I'm going to cut myself off at some point of doing the whole, I love Pete, but I'm about to talk bad about Pete. I'm going to stop myself at some point from doing this. But I so much rather Bo Bichette hitting behind Juan Soto than Pete Alonso, just from an overall baseball lineup construction perspective. But I do think that Polanco being there to be the pop, because he did hit 20 home runs, after Lindor and Soto can get on base and draw walks, because Soto's going to take his walks. And so there's going to be plenty of opportunity for Polanco to hit those doubles, to pull those home runs. And I just think Bichette serving as a second leadoff guy for, and I'll use this to tease my next tier, to get into the, Bichette, Beatty, Robert section of the lineup, I think is just, you're structuring it so much better so that there's no real weak spots that an opposing team can take advantage of. I don't think the Mets would be inherently wrong for deciding to go Lindor, Soto, Bichette, Polanco, because, again, that top 3 would be very, very formidable for a team to go up against. But I just think for staggering the star power that you have while also giving yourself a solid front 4, because now you're giving Jorge Polanco the best protection he's ever had in his career with Soto in front of him and Bichette behind him. That may unlock a different level of Jorge Polanco's game, which might be interesting because you trust Soto, you trust Bichette no matter where you put those guys in the lineup, and so giving that little extra protection to Jorge Polanco might benefit him quite a bit. I do think it's something, and this is the other interesting part of this, they're going to tinker with this, I think, for a little bit until they settle on something.
Yeah. I think, to your point, like, there's so much flexibility with having Bichette and Polanco in those 3 and 4 spots. I think, if anything, that is probably what they're going to experiment with first if things aren't working out. I really do think what Carlos Mendoza said is probably going to be Lindor, Soto, Bichette in your 1, 2, 3. Polanco is easily the most obvious hitter in the 4 spot as we stand here on January 28th. I think, you get to May and maybe the top 3 isn't working how you want, the top 4 isn't working how you want. I think Polanco and Bichette being the switch there is the most obvious choice because, like I said before, the switch hitting doesn't give you any weaknesses in a theoretical lefty start. And then Bichette being that, as you called him, second leadoff hitter, a guy that's kind of staggering your best players, having him hit in your 4 spot, really could give, like you said, Polanco all of the protection in front and behind him to swing away more, hit for more power. I think the strength that the Mets were trying to capitalize on, or the big tweak that they were trying to make with this lineup, is cut down on the strikeout rate from the Pete Alonsos and the Brandon Nimmos from last year and the Jeff McNeils, and bring in guys who are going to be a lot more annoying. They're going to strike out less. They're going to put the ball in play more. They're going to walk. They're going to take their walks, and they're going to be much more difficult to pitch to because that was the biggest issue with Alonso, where we talked about, you don't really want him being your second or third offensive option. There were so many times where Lindor, Soto, Nimmo sometimes would get on base, and then Pete Alonso would strike out, or one of those 3 guys would get on base, maybe even get to second or third, and then Pete Alonso would strike out and kind of end the threat. So I think that's what's so enticing to me about having Bichette and Polanco be those guys protecting Juan Soto. They're a lot scarier to have to go after if you know that I don't even know if I'm going to strike this guy out. Like maybe pitchers would have approached Pete Alonso with the intent of, I'm going to get my swing and misses, and I'm going to get out of this without any threat, even if Lindor or Soto are stealing and getting a scoring position or anything like that.
That's the top four of the lineup. And then you get to the back part, the back five, and this is where I think there's a lot of fun conversations that can be had. I would make one change from the projected Fangraphs lineup. I take that back. It's really two changes. Marcus Semien, under zero circumstances, can be the number 5 hitter. Marcus Semien is brought here to play great defense. Anything you get from his bat is a bonus, but I don't need him hitting in the middle of the order and putting that type of pressure on him coming off of the 2 down years, all of the injuries. Just go be a great defensive second baseman, and if you can hit 250, great. Great. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So the change that I would make, Luis Robert, this is your opportunity, buddy. This is your chance. Give me that 20 homer power. Give me that stolen base threat right in the middle of my second third of the lineup. So again, I would have it Lindor, Soto, Polanco, Bichette. So I'm then having my second tier be Bichette, Luis Robert, Brett Beatty. That's what I would do 4, 5, 6. I think Robert deserves an opportunity to hit in the middle of an order, not towards the top where he's being asked to do too much, but as part of that, if you think about it like in basketball, that second unit, right? That second wave of offense that the Mets will have in their lineup. And I think hitting fifth, he's got Bichette in front of him for protection. He's got Beatty behind him for a little bit of protection. We'll see how much teams respect what Beatty did in the second half last year. But you also balance your lineup, right? You have now, you flip the righties, and I'm going to make one more move to kind of balance it out a little bit even more. I'll have Beatty in the 6th spot. I'm going to have Francisco Alvarez hit 7. Carson Bench, welcome to the show. You're batting 8th. Marcus Semien is going to hit in the 9th spot, and he's going to act as like a de facto second leadoff guy.
Yeah.
That's how I would set it up if I was Carlos Mendoza.
I like that a lot. I think my tweak was more short-sighted and also more strategically flawed. I was going to... Fangraphs right now has Carson Bench making the opening day lineup. They have him batting 9th and playing left field. I'm running with the assumption, or coming into this, I was going to run with the assumption that Bench does not make the opening day lineup. I was going to try to get Mark Vientos in there at the DH spot and have Brett Beatty play left field. But the problem with that is now you're having an extremely right-handed heavy bottom of the lineup.
It's so funny considering where we were a year ago with them being so lefty dominant,
right,
that they will have gone completely the other way.
Right. And so I'll just kind of flesh out my full thoughts here. I think the top 4, we have Lindor, Soto, Bichette, Polanco, with the second 2 being in some order. 5 is where I would put Mark Vientos, just hoping that you're getting more from his bat than last year. I think you're certainly going to... You can project that you're going to get more from Mark Vientos' bat than you would get from Semien in that spot where Fangraphs has him right now. And you get the right-handed bat in that 5 spot behind Polanco, the switch hitter. And then Beatty at 6 playing left field. And then, Alvarez, Robert, and then Semien, I kind of just plant in that 9 spot just because he's a guy that you're, defense. Like you said, he's not really here to play offense. Like, he's here to be the defender.
When he first got traded for, you were looking at the lineup going, all right, I'm going to need a little bit of a career renaissance from Marcus Semien. But after adding Bichette, after getting Polanco, after getting Robert, I don't feel as strong about this. And so I can, I don't want to say punt on a lineup spot because I don't think Simeon's going to be a butcher up there. He's not going to be awful. He's projected for a 101 WRC plus. If we got a league average season for Marcus Semien, I would take it. But I do think you can. And I will say this, there's nobody in this chunk that you feel slam dunk, gotta have them as my number 5 hitter. And I do think to varying degrees, there's risk associated with all of these guys. Now, if you just base it off of WRC plus projections, the person that should hit in the 5 spot is Francisco Alvarez. And the thing that would worry me, he was so good after the promotion last year. After getting sent down when he just was lost. He was so good after coming back. I want to put Francisco Alvarez in the lowest pressure environment that I can at the big league level. I don't want him to think I'm hitting number 5 for this team, and I've got Bichette and Polanco and Soto and Lindor on base, and I got to hit the ball to the moon, and I got to hit it 478 feet with a 127 exit velo. Like, I don't want him thinking like that when he's up to plate. I want him feeling comfortable and just being that free swinging catcher. And so I think you kind of have to almost save him from himself a little bit because he's still so young. He's only 24 still, that you have to put him lower down in the order and sit him down and say, just be you. Just be Francisco Alvarez, and the rest will sort itself out. And so I don't want to put him in that 5 spot and put so much pressure on him. Now, in the same breath, I'm taking Luis Robert, who is a off-injured, didn't have a good year last year player, and I'm putting him in the number 5 spot. So it's not like there's a clear-cut answer here, but I love the upside of Robert. He's an older player. He's a veteran. I just think if I'm going to put somebody, and maybe that's why Simeon is the default on the Fangraphs lineup, is because he is the guy with the most experience of this group.
Yeah.
And so you're not putting Beatty there, who had a good second half. You're not putting Alvarez, who was really good in that after getting recalled. It's not Robert, change of scenery. It's not Benj, who's never taken it back. It's the tried and true seasoned vet, World Series champion, former All-Star, Gold Glover, and you just stick him there, no problem. I can kind of understand the logic, but I do wonder if the Mets kind of toy around with who's hitting in that number 5.
I think we even touched on this in our last episode. The 1 through 4 spots feel pretty much set in some kind of order. Like, I think whatever tweaks they make to the top 4, they're not going to drop any of those guys really any lower. Unless, Mark Vientos has some massive breakout performance and they are able to bump him up and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the case that I could see is like Polanco isn't great, but he's not bad. And a Beatty or a Vientos or a Robert or an Alvarez just like really takes off, and they're like, all right, we're going to move this guy up. We'll move Polanco down in the order. That feels like the only spot that really is up for grabs.
Right. And like outside of that 4, the bottom 5 can kind of just be any combination permutation that you want, with the obvious mentality that ideally you have some kind of balance with the lefties and the righties. I think looking at this and seeing Carson Benj being that lefty that you could kind of break things up with definitely would help the Mets if he's able to make the opening day roster and be that additional lefty bat, be the additional outfield help that I think the Mets would prefer to have as far as bat over a Tyrone Taylor or, a Brett Beatty playing left field. So that's kind of my thought is I just wonder what kind of major tweaks they're going to make to those bottom 5 spots throughout the season. I'm with you. I think Robert playing to his potential upside is something that would be more intriguing to me than putting Alvarez in that spot, especially because, Francisco Alvarez seems like a great kid. Luis Robert had a 38 home run season 2 years ago. Like, that upside is absolutely higher than what we have seen so far from Francisco Alvarez at the major league level. And so betting on that upside, having him be in that 5 spot, maybe even giving either Bichette or Polanco extra protection as the lineup flips to the bottom half, you could really see a world where that top 5 of the Mets order is really scary. Add in Alvarez, Beatty, and Vientos playing to their, high prospect, maybe power potential. Carson Bench comes up and is also lighting the world on fire, and this lineup looks really scary. But in general, I just like how balanced and how much power, contact, lack of strikeout variety there is, just 1 through 9 right here when I'm looking at this Fangraphs projection.
Yeah, and if you move Benj up to the 8 spot, right, to kind of balance it out, to really kind of evenly distribute your lefties and your righties, I can see a world where when they're facing a lefty, you've got Tyrone Taylor in for Benj in left. You've got Mark Vientos in for Beatty at the DH spot, and you just load up on the righties. You let Polanco and Lindor flip around, and then your only lefty that you're playing is Soto because it's Juan bleeping Soto, and he plays every day, right? And so you can really start to take advantage of those platoon matchups in a way that you probably weren't equipped to do in the past. And I also really... And the reason why I wanted to do this episode now, and we'll get to see how Carlos Mendoza deploys this in the spring, but I do think that there is a world where Carlos Mendoza, with the bottom part of his order, just needs to ride the hot hands and not worry about righty, lefty, and balancing. And it's just, I need to put the guys that are hitting the best just in a row and just let them get the most at bats because it's so volatile with I mean, let's just go through. Marcus Semien hasn't been a good hitter in 2 seasons. Brett Baty has potential, had a really good second half last year, but that's it. That's all you got. Francisco Alvarez, it's been such a rocky road. It's been such a roller coaster. What version of Francisco Alvarez are you going to get? Luis Robert, 2 years ago, was a premier power hitter in this game, but has been injured and underperformed the last 2 seasons. And then the last guy is a guy who has never taken it at bat at the big league level. Like, there's a lot of potential. And I do think the floor is somewhat reasonable for those guys. But there is some built-in volatility that Carlos Mendoza may just have to ride it out with, okay, this week Brett Baty and Francisco Alvarez are doing well. They're moving up in the lineup for the next week or two until somebody else gets hot and we'll move it around. Like, it's going to be until there's a large stretch of games where things settle down and there's just consistency up and down the lineup. I do think the bottom part is going to be kind of a darts game where just every day it's just different order in the bottom part of the lineup until somebody grabs hold of one of these spots.
What concerns me past just the 9 guys in the lineup, and it kind of extends to Carson Bench, if he doesn't make the opening day lineup.
Tyrone Taylor, baby.
I'm just looking at the handedness of the hitters in this lineup and the bench that's currently projected for the Mets.
Very right-handed. Very right-handed.
Very right-handed. Bottom of the order. You have Brett Baty as pretty much your only lefty. Ronnie Mauricio is currently the only option that can hit left-handed on the bench. He's a switch hitter. And then Fangraphs has Luis Torrens, Mark Vientos, and Tyrone Taylor as 3 righties also on the bench. So
Jared Young, come on down.
I was looking through and trying to figure out who it would be. I think Jared Young is the most obvious choice because he has an option left. Vidal Brujan being the guy the Mets brought in for cash considerations from Minnesota has no options left, so maybe he's the guy that makes the roster as an extra bench player if Benj doesn't make the roster. And then you can see a world where Carson's ready. Mr. Brujan, nice knowing you, but time to hit the road, buddy. Like, cash considerations, very low stakes, but having that extra left-handed bat is something that I think the Mets are really going to be considering because the only true lefties in the bottom 5 right now are Brett Baty and maybe Ronnie Mauricio because Benj is not a guaranteed spot there.
I'm just going to throw it out there because you didn't mention him. Ryan Clifford makes the team?
He was a guy that I saw and I thought to myself, that would be something. But I just think that knowing how the Jared Youngs of the world tend to be the fill-ins.
Because the Mets don't want to bring up a guy like Ryan Clifford and have him get, 3 at-bats every week.
Have him be the Luis Angel Acuna where he's just kind of reduced to a bench role, only playing against right-handed pitchers because he's the lefty platoon bat.
And that's overall a good strategy for the Mets to have. Like, don't waste your prospects. If you're going to call them up, play them. And so that's why it can be very frustrating at times, but that's why you see Jared Young come up and, randomly on a Wednesday get a start. And you're like, why is Jared Young in the game? Because that start's going to come up 1 every 10 days, and you don't want to waste Ryan Clifford's developmental by having him, just sitting on the bench.
And all due respect to Jared Young, but he is not Carson Bench. He is not Ryan Clifford. He is not AJ Ewing. Like, he's a guy that they're kind of just shuttling to fill a spot when they need an extra lefty bat. So, I mean, we'll see how it goes. I just looking right now at how right-handed heavy the bottom of the lineup is and the bench. That is the one thing that concerns me is like you come up against most pitchers that throw right-handed, you're going to have a little bit of a struggle if you're not getting reverse splits from one of your right-handed hitters.
Yeah, and then the other part too is, AJ Ewing is going to be 21 next season. He finished last year in Double-A. He hit .339 in 28 games. If he has a great first half in Double-A, they may just get him up to Syracuse, and then he's right there.
Yeah.
And that's a lefty who can play second base, can play the outfield, can play a bunch of different positions for you, and maybe becomes, your Jeff McNeil in some ways and kind of moves around all over the place. So I know they kind of envision Brett Baty for that role, but there is a world where it could be him as well. But yeah, fascinating conversations, and this is fun. Like, this is, I said it at the top, but this is one of the fun byproducts of all of the change the Mets went through is that we're going to get to see some new in terms of how the lineup gets put together. It's not going to be like, oh, okay, it's going to be Lindor, it's going to be Soto, it's going to be Alonso, Nimmo's going to be there, and they're just going to hope that it all works out. Like, no, like there's going to be some actual tinkering that goes on because they have so many new personalities that they need to figure out. And, Luis Robert may struggle through the first, month or two of the season, and you're going to have to deal with that if you're Carlos Mendoza. Carson Benj may come up and, tear the cover off the ball. You got to figure out what you're going to do with him. You're going to move him up in the lineup if he has a good 2 months. Like, these are things that you actually have to deal with as a manager, and you can't just go, oh, it's the same group as last year. We're just going to run out the same lineup and hope we can, score enough runs to win. Like, no, like there's an active process here that the Mets are going to have to be involved in, and that's kind of fun. That's going to do it for us here on this edition of the Believe in Mets pod. Please rate, review, subscribe to the program wherever you are listening to us. Give us 5 stars. Share the show with a friend. If you want to watch the program over on YouTube, just search Jack McKessie, McKessy. And you can comment, share what your go-to lineup for the Mets this year is going to be, what you would like to see Carlos Mendoza put out there. And before you know it, we'll get to see some spring training lineups, and we'll get to see exactly what the Mets plan is. We're back later on this week with one more episode. Until next time, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.